This video is brought to you by Straight Goods News, Canada's alternative online news source. Visit straightgoods.ca.
It was a male voice, automated, claiming to be from Elections Canada, and that telling us that our polling station had been moved. It was a bit of a joke to my wife initially that she knew it wasn't accurate because we both had already voted, so it didn't matter to us. But the thing that really caught her ear was that the station that they said we had to go to was at a building that at the time had recently been closed and wasn't even open. We knew where the building was. Then we had the same thing happen to the person who ultimately became our provincial candidate. He got a call in the late morning or early afternoon along the same nature, sending him to the same polling station that of course didn't exist.
You filed with election. You filed with
I'm sorry, Bob, let me just make one more point. The other thing that my wife caught, and this is why it showed up in the affidavit, is she got the phone number. And that P.I. Poutine phone number is the same. And that's how they traced it to that throwaway phone.
So were you contacted by, or your wife contacted, or you contacted by Elections Canada and the RCMP? Have you heard back? Do you know anything more that you could enlighten us?
We did not hear anything back. We reported it that same morning. We had at least 3 or 4 others, maybe as many as a half dozen that day that we reported to Elections Canada, the local returning officer.
You had calls or complaints from other people?
These were calls in from other people, including the ultimate provincial candidate. But there were 3 or 4 in addition to that. We turned all of those in verbally to the returning officer in Windsor Tecumeh.
Did they all have the number, the same number?
I don't believe so. I think my wife may have been the only one who caught the number.
So that doesn't sound very widespread, just 4 or 5 out of your entire riding. Had you heard of others that didn't bother to complain?
We have heard of others, and in fact we've had one call since this all broke last week from a citizen an elderly citizen who lives in a high-rise building, mostly for people with disabilities or senior citizens. Now that building has always had the polling booth in it, but she got a similar type of call that wasn't going to be there that day, and she had to go literally miles away. If that had been the case, a lot of people would not have not tried to vote because most of the people in that building rely on being able to vote in that building.
So what do you know of the state of the investigation involving you?
Yeah, if I can go back to that, I have been disappointed with Elections Canada. They've never got back to us, either myself or my wife or my campaign, until we heard this week that they had used the information we gave them in the affidavit in November in Alberta. Was the first time I knew that in fact they had done any follow-up at all. We had done a follow-up with them on either the 3rd or the 4th to see what they were doing. We're given some bland assurances that they would pass it on to either Ottawa or Toronto, and they would take care of it.
They've now clearly taken it much more seriously than you thought.
Yeah, no, I'd given up. I'd given up of any hope that they were going to do anything about it.
So what you heard about you referenced Alberta when you made the complaint?
Well, the affidavit that was filed to get the warrant to go in and take.
Yes.
Well, in that affidavit, they referred to the phone number. Right. That phone number was the one that my wife had gotten.
But the complaints you made to your local Elections Canada office or the national candidate?
We didn't complain to the national office. We just complained to the local office in Windsor.
So what are Canadians to make of this? I mean, there are quite a few ridings people are talking about here. Some of them are not verified, sprinkling of calls here, sprinkling of calls there. There's no one common thread yet. Well, what are Canadians to make of all this while the investigation continues?
Well, I think at the very least that they have to think that it's not a smear campaign by the 2 opposition parties of the government. I was personally insulted today earlier this week when the Prime Minister has repeatedly stood in that chamber and said this is all made up after the fact 9 months down the road. Well, even if it is, that call that I got this week from that senior citizen, she still remembers that she had to take this kind of abuse to her democratic process. And the reality, though, is that a lot of these complaints went in on election day or the day after. So trying to dodge it on the basis that this is made up after the fact is not wrong, and that's an insult to the Canadian citizens who suffered from this process. I think the other thing that it does, and this is the feedback again that I'm getting from people that are talking to me in my riding, is that this is a situation that calls for an inquiry, that clearly the democratic process was at least attempted to be interfered with. At this point, was it a few hundred? Was it a few thousand? Was it many thousand? We don't know that for sure.